Have to do now. Oops, I forgot to hit the go live button. My bad. Okay, welcome to Adobe Live. Hi. Um, I totally forgot to hit the go live button. My bad. Anyhow, welcome to Pro Tips. We're gonna kick things off again, and as I was saying before, I'll just go over this just real quick again, since I think I missed like the first minute, so not a huge deal. If you do use Photoshop, you do have access to tons of free brushes, so you can check those out. That's on the Adobe website, and the amazing Kyle Webster has put together a lot of resources here that in fact are free to download. So definitely check those out. Or you may have a favorite artist, like myself. Hi, Spencer, industrial designer, and you may want to download their brushes. You can do that. But Adobe has this awesome tool now called Adobe Firefly, and we have the ability to expand on our creativity. Now, I've been making brushes for a lot of years, and as I mentioned, I do like to incorporate textures into my brushes. Interestingly enough, this texture on the front of this shoe I actually pulled in from a banana. Okay, pulled that in from a banana, and so I'm going to show you how to make your own custom texture, or pattern rather. Apply that to your brushes so that you can get a more interesting effect. But let's kick things off with Firefly. If you've never tried it out, just go to firefly.adobe.com. and you will be transported to the magical land of generative AI. But don't let it scare you off. It's not that hard to use. In fact, it's such a wonderful tool. If you've used other generative AI products before, you do have the ability to kind of work in a more visual way. And I think that's definitely an advantage that you have when you use something, or when you use Adobe Firefly, I should say. So the first thing it's going to ask you is, hey, type something in. And I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking of a repeating texture, because what you want to be able to do in Photoshop, I'll give you an example here. Actually, if you caught Pro Tips before, I was able to create these sponge textures in Firefly as well. So I'm going to open up one of these. And, if I were to repeat this whole thing, okay, let's just, for creativity's sake here, kind of show you how I'm going to do that. I'm just going to make a new layer, and let's go ahead and clear out the background. Everyone works differently. It's always interesting to see how people work. But effectively, if I want to repeat this texture, okay, this file being square, it looks like it's about 28 inches here. It's a huge image. Firefly has given us some high quality stuff there. If I divide this into 4, okay, what I want to have happen with my repeating texture is that this top corner here needs to be repeated, okay, over here, so that when we have a sequence of these images, they'll feel like they're all coordinated. But the problem you can see here is that in the middle of this image, we're going to have some issues. So if I were to take this whole thing and make a pattern, and I'm going to assume some of you know how to do that. If you go to Edit, Define Pattern, that's going to put it in your palette where you have patterns, and you can pick from those. I have to be thoughtful about the placement. Sorry, just got a message here, just making sure. Okay, all right, cool. I thought I was muted. I have to make sure everything is placed in the right place so that it repeats, okay, left to right, up and down. And that can be a lot of work. But here's one thing I have been really enjoying with Firefly now. I can just go in here and type sponge texture. Well, actually, let's go to the start here. I'll say seamless. All right, that's important because that's telling Firefly what you want. I want a seamless, repeating, sponge-like texture. And I could even say with multiple colors and sizes of holes. It's a weird prompt, but let's see what it says. Sizes of holes. All right, cool. So I'm just going to hit enter. It's going to load up here and create that texture for us, do all the heavy lifting that we would have to have done otherwise. So we do have Firefly helping us out there pretty well. Apologies. I'm trying to pull up the Behance chat here, but I can't seem to get it to work. Oh, well, if you do have something that is pressing, you can always comment on. Oh, there it is now. Hi, welcome everyone. Okay, so I've created this like weird texture, right? Now, I like to sketch shoes. In fact, I came up with a quick sketch here before the stream. And let's go to, I think it's that one. Nope. See, I'm so horrible at labeling things. There we go. I have this little shoe sketch that I did pretty quick. I could take this texture from Firefly. Okay, I like this one right here. I don't know which one's your favorite, but if you have one left to right, let me know. I'm going to hit share and download. This is something I probably would not have come up with myself. I will say that. Like, I didn't imagine that this would be the texture I'd get, but I'm kind of in love with it, especially with the color. So if I go back to Photoshop here now, and actually my file has popped up in a download. So let's go ahead and open that up in Photoshop real quick, and let's take a look at the image size. It's Command Alt I if you like keyboard shortcuts, or Control Alt I. Yes, Carol, lots of untitled stuff, right? I'm just gonna make this 5 by 5 inches, and let's do 200 DPI. I can do that because the original size of this was like 28 inches. So I can reasonably assume that I can get a 5 by 5 image at 200 DPI. We can zoom in and see, yeah, you know, there's reasonable quality there as well. So to define that pattern, as I was saying before, if I just, I like to select all, maybe I'm a creature of habit, kind of old school. I'm going to go define pattern. What's the name of this? We'll call it Crazy Sponge. Hit OK. And now if I go to my new document that I had created, Untitled 4, shout out Carol. If I go to my new document that I created, I can use this pattern in a few ways. So in Photoshop, for example, with the paint bucket tool, you do have the option to use the foreground color here, or you can use the pattern. Okay, so if I select pattern and now open up this window, you'll see I've created patterns in the past when I've been making brushes for myself, or if I want to add some texture to my sketches that I do quite often. And that just lends itself to adding a bit of a human element. There's also this window patterns, which will pull up all the patterns. They do sync across libraries if you want them to, or Creative Cloud libraries. So that way you can have access to your stuff wherever you are. Right, really powerful feature. But now that I've selected pattern here, I can select which pattern. I'm going to pick Crazy Sponge. And I'm just going to use the window I'm more familiar with right here. And now when I click, let's make a new layer. Now when I click, it's going to fill all of this with that Crazy Sponge. So there are a couple tiny issues here, right? But for me and for our purposes today, it's not gonna break this. All right. What I mean is when I zoom in here, we're so close. We're so close, in fact, that I can even inside Photoshop, okay, if there's an area like this, this is also the power of generative AI. I can make a selection there and hit generative fill. And if I leave that blank, Photoshop will go ahead and try and correct that little region. And then I can incorporate that into a new version of my brush that does seamlessly repeat, because what it's going to try and do is resolve that area, as you see there, in a way that is now even more seamless. So for those veterans who have made brushes and textures in the past, and you've had to use the rubber stamp tool or healing brush or anything like that, this is kind of a game changer. All right, you can go in and kind of massage your texture a bit. In fact, one of the other nice things about using Firefly and Gen AI inside Photoshop is if I want an even crazier variation, I'm just taking my mouse and making a lasso selection right now. Okay, if you want to see what that looks like, I'll just turn on my quick mask. All right, so I just made this selection here. And I'm going to take away part of the selection because I selected too much. I got a little greedy. All right, I'm going to take away part of it right there. I can even go to select feather if you want, if you're feeling a little, you know, unsure, and you want to just give that a little, what's the word, variation in that boundary or that selection. You could do that, but we're just going to go ahead and hit generative fill. And if I hit generate, Photoshop's going to come up with another option for the middle of this, so it doesn't feel as necessarily structured and symmetric, right? And on top of that, we do have options that will be populated here in the variations window of our generative process. So we can play with those options. Here I'll show you as I click across. Very, very subtle. Okay, very, very subtle, but they are there. And so Photoshop's trying to kind of blend things together. All right, so what does this mean for a brush specifically? Let's go ahead and clear all this gunk out here. and I'm going to make a new layer. Again, creature of habit. I don't label my layers. Okay, we don't have time for that on pro tips today. I'm teasing mostly. I'm one of those designers who is pure creative chaos. Okay, so I'm going to go to my brushes here, and kind of like last time, if you want to get to this brush settings window, you can go to window, brush settings. I can also open up my brushes themselves, and they happen to be grouped into the same window. So here I have some favorite brushes that I like to use most frequently. I'm going to start with this hard round brush. You should have something like that if you're following along in your general brushes. So if I open this up, there is a hard round pressure size brush, but I wanted to create one that did not depend on pressure. If you missed that pro tips, fortunately for you, Adobe's got your back, and you can always catch these on replay as well. All right. So now that I have my brush selected, I want to go to brush settings. It's important that you have your brush selected so that you are actually modifying the brush that you want to use. Now, I just want to say, if you are going to make changes to your brushes, it's important to kind of understand the fundamentals. Remember, a brush is a stamp that is effectively repeated in sequence along a given path. So here, if I up the spacing on this brush, you'll see that I now have these dots that are spaced apart. But if I get these close enough, I now have a consistent brush. Okay, and I also mentioned that you can kind of play with the spacing to make Photoshop work faster. If you've worked on very complex documents and you have a brush activated, right, you can see some of the repeats there, but it's not noticeable enough. And that's gonna, at least for me, when I'm working with big heavy documents and I'm trying to draw, especially at higher resolution, sometimes Photoshop chugs along on that machine, but it's not Photoshop's fault. Okay, we're not going to throw Photoshop under the bus today. All right, so now I've got my brush tip shape selected, and you can we'll get into stamps a little bit later in today's presentation, as we add some more details to the sketch I'm going to show you. But what I want to focus on again is texture. We can even play with transfer if we want, but if you're following along, jump to the texture panel. Okay, you've got a hard round brush or some simple brush. We're going to go to texture, and now up here I have the option to apply a texture to the brush. Okay, so I have this grass texture, for example, that I had before, and by default Photoshop's not going to do much with that. Okay, so if you thought, hey, I am just going to pick a texture and the brush is going to work. No, there is one important thing you have to do. Now, specifically, I'm thinking of a way to kind of paint in an area texture. Now, remember, I kind of showed you with the paint bucket. I can also highlight my grass.jpg here and drop that in. And now I have this grassy, furry looking texture. Okay, Voodoo Val has a good point. You can tweak the spacing on the brush too to get things smooth if you want to. So here, okay, if I pick my crazy sponge, which we did, we get the fill as well. So applying it to the brush is a little bit different in that I don't want to apply it to each stroke, okay, of the brush. I actually want to deselect this option that says texture each tip. Now, my color selected here is black, and I need to make a couple other adjustments. You do have the opportunity to change the blending mode of the brush, as well as the brightness and contrast and scale of this texture. So let's see what happens when we play with these settings. I'm going to go to multiply to start, and notice how the brush itself now has that texture being represented. So when I go to my canvas and start painting, look at that. I have this furry texture. Okay, furry, grassy texture. Now, part of the reason it looks this way is I have to play with these brightness and contrast settings. So watch what happens when I drop the contrast, for example, make it negative contrast. Whoa, it kind of changes the appearance of the brush. Let's add some color and see what happens. Okay, you kind of get the picture there, hopefully, of what's happening. And the brush is set to multiply. Okay, so each stroke is going to kind of build up on the other strokes. So just something to be aware of as well, that this blending mode will affect how your stroke shows up as you paint. We can play with the brightness as well. I can make this darker. Okay, and you can also invert the texture. All right, so inside that stroke we do have that texture. So now I'm going to go to our crazy sponge, and let's see what oh wow, look at that. We have our crazy sponge texture with a little bit of build up there as well. We can also play with the depth of the texture. Okay, so how intense that texture is going to show up. But yeah, just a little tip here. Let's go ahead and use Val's tip as well. Where did that go? Spacing. All right, I'm going to drag that down because my spacing was a little bit too far there on the edges, but you can see how I can kind of paint in that texture. As far as the color of the brush, we can enable things like color dynamics. We can control that and add some jitter if we want to. So for example, I can say I want to jitter between the foreground and background color, maybe to recapture some of the nature of this texture that's happening. And let's just say I'm going to have this related to the pen pressure. All right. So if I press, let's see, if you turn on apply per tip, then it's going to vary as you're moving the brush. So if I lower the jitter here, you'll see you can get some really interesting combinations happening with the brush. So I do this to kind of just show that there are options in terms of how you can use this pattern as you're working. So here is an example of a sketch where I might want to apply some texture. We're going to do this in two ways. One is to use a brush with a pattern that I've already defined, or we could, you know, go with the crazy sponge texture if we want. We can always go back to the brush tip shape, by the way, and if you want a softer appearance for the brush, lower the hardness, and you can kind of see here, okay, we're getting some of that crazy coloration happening there. Now, this isn't a real shoe. Like I'm not gonna ship this, but again, I just want to show you how you might use something like that. If I had something that intense on my drawing, I probably wouldn't have the color dynamics like that. That's not something I would necessarily want to do, but here, let's go ahead and how about we just pick maybe something a little bit more neutral and not too crazy. All right, here we go. Maybe like this slightly greenish color. And if I come in here, it's like a green gray. All right, not to be confused with jean gray. I'm just going to paint that in. Okay, so what's the difference between this and say filling the texture? If I wanted to use the same texture, I could make a selection. I'm not going to freehand this. Let's use the polygonal lasso tool. But whoa, there we go. Press the wrong button there. I could just make a selection here, or if you wanted to make a rough selection, that's fine too. We could do something like this and then go ahead and fill with our crazy sponge pattern. I'm on the same layer though. I don't want to be on the same layer. So I could fill this with that crazy sponge pattern and then just erase. So multiple ways to get to the same result in terms of applying your pattern or texture to whatever object you're working with. All right, so I'm going to focus just on the front of the shoe here because we have some pieces that are kind of coming together. Let's go ahead and fill in maybe the rest of this, and I'm feeling kind of spicy today, so let's go ahead and make a quick selection. I'm just going to do this real rough, just like so. And like I said, I already have another pattern that I defined, little fur pattern, and we kind of do this, you know, the same way in Firefly. Where come back taskbar. In Firefly, we can do that. So just to show you what that looks like, I generated some fur textures that are repeating. And now I can, you know, if I want to get, like I said, a little crazy, we can just fill with that. When it comes to the pattern itself, we can go in and we can edit that pattern. I think this one was a little bit bigger. Yeah, there you go. This one's a little bit bigger in terms of scale. So let's go to settings and looks like I have to redefine that pattern. So what I would have to do is open my, where are you? There you are. Open my fur pattern here. I'm just going to undo and make this just a little bit bigger, just so you guys can see what I mean here. Just under image size, let's make this 5 inches, kind of like we had before, 200 DPI. And then now I'm going to define pattern, hit OK. I'm going to have to clean up my pattern window here in a minute. And now I should be able to fill with that new pattern, okay? Right after crazy sponge. Okay, so now I have that fur pattern being repeated on the shoe, and we can go ahead and erase what we don't want. So painting and erasing is kind of how I like to do things personally. And we've got like 3 minutes, so I want to show you one more quick thing that I can do. So let's pretend that I actually, took half an hour and cleaned this up and it was looking amazing. All right. There are a couple of spots here where, like I said, we have connecting pieces on the shoe. And if you've ever looked at a shoe, hopefully you've paid attention to the items of clothing you wear, you'll know that there are stitches, and I promised we would get a little stitchy, so I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to make a new layer. And when I think about a stitch, I think about, a shape. I'm going to do this in black and white. Let's go back to, I'm going to save this brush preset first. You have to save your presets, otherwise they go away. So let's go back to our brushes, hard round. So when I think about a stitch, I think of something like this, and I also think about, there might be a highlight on this stitch. So I'm going to drop this down and let's put a little highlight here on our brush, or sorry, on this little shape. And if you want to get fancy with it, we can even put some white down here. Now you can't see it, but it'll be there when we capture this. So now I'm going to make a selection. Let's transform this just to make it easy for myself. And we'll go edit, define brush preset. And there you have a sample brush. So now when I go to my brush settings, okay, and I go to brush tip shape, I have the option to now increase the spacing of my brush. All right. I can also tell it to, where is it? I think it's in shape dynamics, angle jitter. I can say control by direction, the angle. So see how that's all aligned now? So basically what I'm saying is I just made a brush where we can paint with stitches. Okay, isn't that amazing? We can paint with stitches. So now if I want stitches on my shoe, I can just get stitchy like that. All right, so you can do some really cool things with your brushes if you get creative, and just take these concepts and principles and roll with it. All right, I wish we had more time today, but lucky for you, I'll be back on Adobe Live soon. All right, I'm not gonna say when and spoil it for everyone. But I'll be back with more tips and creative challenges for y'all. So if you like this presentation, definitely give me a shout out, say hi anytime. I'm on Instagram. I'm easy to find. Pro tips, always a wild ride. Lots of content packed into those 30 minutes. But I hope you get some time to go ahead, practice, mess around. I believe last time I said, a lot of this stuff you can learn by just trial and error, experimentation, taking some of these concepts, playing with it, and seeing what you come up with. All right. Up next, we have that is hidden for some. My image disappeared, and I forgot. So my bad. But I will say, stay tuned. I'm like a hot mess this morning. You know what? Maybe I should put my shades on, say thank you, and remember, practice, make messes. Because failure is a chance to learn. All right, I'll see you again on Pro Tips. Take care. Thank you. This was so much fun, and I'll catch y'all later. All right. Happy Wednesday.